All right. Well, I will start with just a couple of announcements. There are some updates with the social work intern cohort. For folks not familiar with that project, what it essentially is that we are, Sean and I and Jean Anderson are working with two schools of social work, UW Stevens Point and UW Madison, to work with a group of member libraries. 14 member libraries had signed up in order to help assist with social service needs in their libraries. The idea was to see about placing student interns in from the schools of social work in the libraries to work on projects and or provide direct service, or also um, do some kind of identifying of needs. Where we're at with that this semester or this fall, we do have a student that was placed at Goodman South Madison branch. So they'll be starting, but we're focusing right now on gathering some needs assessments, and that there is a meeting scheduled for October 6th. Um, and Are there any questions on that project that folks have or are interested in knowing about? Great.
Mark,
Mhm.
this is Chrissy. I was just wondering, was it only was there only one student from the school that was like interested in a public library placement? Or I
Mhm.
know we were just very excited to have potentially as many
Right.
interns as possible, because I think at least 3 or 4 of our locations were signed up, and we've just seen, a lot of need.
Mhm.
So we were just wondering why there's only one, and if there's anything we can do to help encourage more.
Yeah, I think it's because right now we're sort of just really building that project. It is a pilot, and uh, library or internships in libraries is still a really kind of a new sort of practicum experience for the students. So I think that might have been one of the reasons that we weren't able to attract more students to this, to the practicum placements. Other reasons, there are actually students who also are facing either transportation or time barriers to having a placement. So it's really and Sean, you can feel free to jump in, that this is sort of a project that we're still really laying the foundation and building um, on. So yeah.
Thank you. I'll let our other supervisors who are wondering know. And if there's
Yeah.
anything we can do to help encourage, if we've got a couple of different social workers that, we work with pretty closely, like either through Porch Light or the Beacon, or
Mhm.
I know there's one of the HR people in the city has a social work degree, and actually did her practicum in a library, not one of
Oh,
ours, but years ago did that. So like if there's stories or quotes or things that we could help with, like please just let me know, and I'm happy to try to get some of that
yeah.
for you.
Um, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's sort of kind of build a um kind of like a formal job description, or at least an idea of what it would be like to have an experience in a library. That's something we can certainly look into. And we can absolutely think about well, what we are doing right now that might help lay that foundation are some formal needs assessment surveys, and that perhaps that work could also get students interested. But what you had mentioned, quotes or experiences or stories, that might be a way we can approach it as well. Thanks, Chrissy.
Thank you so much for taking it on. We're very excited about the potential of the project.
Yeah, me too. I would love to see needs met through the libraries, because libraries definitely have that, you know, ideal location and service. So yeah.
Another thing that we've talked about many times at every meeting of the social work cohort is we're really looking for examples of specific projects that the
Mhm.
interns could do. And so, Chrissy, it sounds like you might have some. We're always looking for, even if you're not a member of the cohort, we'll get you in because it's slow, but we want to do this start correctly. That if you have a specific example of a project so that the interns can understand what they would be doing.
Mhm.
We know that there are some interns who might be interested simply in doing their internship at public libraries, but as specific as possible, the better. So some of the examples that have come up, and Mark helped me out,
Mhm.
in the social work cohort are helping with workforce development assistance. Some have talked about having, a specific some specific hours every week. One project idea that's come up is could we have an intern help with summer food site work? Um, are there youth services projects? So as specific as possible, or if you have topics that you feel need to be addressed, either in providing service topics, or continuing ed topics. That's what we're looking for too, because some of the in service, or excuse me, some of the intern experience can be providing professional development on trauma informed care. So we're looking at, you know, at a broad experience for these interns, and really looking at what our libraries needs and matching those needs with student interest.
Mhm. Yep.
Homelessness is of course tops on that list too.
Right. Um, yeah. Feel free to reach out if you do have project or topic ideas. That would that would certainly help build this project. Yep. All right. Um, so with that, I just also wanted to mention a couple of recent or upcoming webinars that are on topics that this group has discussed or have been brought up in previous check-in meetings. Um, uh, at least I think it was either last week or the week before, there was this great webinar provided by Libby Richter, who works as the library social worker in Eau Claire Public Library, on mental health in library customer interactions. I've linked to the recording. It was hosted by IFLIS Library System, and it was really good in terms of some practical techniques for helping folks who are maybe experiencing mental health challenges while at the library. So that's linked to the agenda. And then another one, it comes from the Ryan Dowd homelessness trainings, and this one is upcoming October 10th at 11. I've linked to the registration, and it is Homeless De-escalation 101, Trauma Basics, and the 5 most important seconds of conflict. And it sounds like a really interesting and informative webinar. Those are the 2 that I just wanted to mention because they sort of have tied to topics that we've talked about at these check-in meetings. And if there aren't any questions or ideas, I'll hand it over to Sean for the outreach idea roundup.
I'm muted. Excuse me. Before we do that,
Mhm.
have any of you attended any webinars or professional development programs in the last couple of months that you want to point out? We're always looking for, recordings. All right. And let us know if there are topics that you would like to see addressed in South Central's professional development schedule. That's something that, we're definitely looking at 2023 right now. And with the ease of developing and presenting webinars, this is something that we can, do, not on turn of a dime or anything, but, pretty quickly within a couple of months if there's something that comes up. Okay.
This is a little out of the lane, but I just got to do a training from the city of Madison about the public service loan relief. And so I don't know that there's a recording to be shared, but I think it's an important thing to boost among library staff that, hey, you may be eligible for this. And there's a deadline coming up really soon for filing paperwork with looser rules. So that's at the end of October. So again, I don't have a concrete link to share out, but I'd really recommend everybody sharing it with their staffs.
Yeah, I can search for it if you wanted to find it, you can let me know and I can add it to the notes. So thank you.
That's great. Thank you. I saw a listing for a recording. I didn't attend the live presentation, and it was from UW-Madison about the library, excuse me, not library, about the university, the loan forgiveness program. And I almost posted it to the SCLS Facebook page, but because it was so specific from UW-Madison, I didn't. Maybe I will, and I'll find it here and post it to the recording because it looked really interesting and informative. Rachel, you made me think of that too. Thank you. And it's on a related subject. We will have Debbie Reese presenting a webinar for us next month. And Debbie Reese will be presenting a webinar on evaluating books about Indigenous Americans and looking at, what have books in the past? What is the identities? What are the stereotypes that these books have presented? So it's for collection development. Debbie Reese speaks about youth books, but it might be something of interest to this group. So watch for that, and we can send that information out to the listserv too. Debbie presented the Arbuthnot Award a few years ago here in Madison in 2019, I think. Right, it was before COVID, but shortly before. And if there's ever any collection development topics that you'd like to discuss in terms of inclusivity, we have a new collection development work group, and you can contact me or Mark if you're interested in getting on that collection development email list. We had our first meeting, our first check-in meeting like this one a couple of weeks ago, and it was really great. And I'll be getting the notes out really soon. So it kind of crosses topics. All right. So I think it was Minda at our last check-in meeting who asked about, could we just have a time when the group talks about outreach programs, either programs that you've done or programs that you're interested in doing that are outreach to your library communities. And I think that's a great idea. So we're going to spend our remaining time together, or as much time as we need, talking about what are some outreach projects and outreach programs that have worked well for you and your library, or what are some that you've heard about that you'd like to try doing, or if you have any questions for one another about outreach programs that are being done at your libraries or that you have done.
So I have a staff person that recently did an outreach program at Luna's Grocery near this area in order to present to Spanish-speaking parents with the opportunity of having a story time at their locations, and then those story times, now that the weather is different, instead of being outdoor at Luna's, are going to happen at the library. And that, I thought that that was a good example of doing outreach to a community, letting them know about the library, bringing the library to them, and then bringing them to the library.
Thank you so much for that. Early on in my career, I did a few story times at grocery stores, and it was very rewarding. The grocery store provided snacks, they provided apples and fresh fruit. This was for rural kids in upstate New York. So going from a city, Madison, to a rural community too.
I mean, I can share what I've done, but I'm like, that was a great idea. I appreciate that one. So we spent a lot of time outside until the weather will not be as cooperative, but we still plan to be outside. So we went to parks. We did pop-up libraries and parks 3 times a week. I know Madison did a lot. I saw your signs because we overlapped in some of the parks, which was great for me to see what kind of yard signs you had for Parks Alive and some other things. I've followed the mobile food pantry around to areas in Fitchburg that are high needs. I followed the Munch mobile lunch truck around to high needs areas. I've done things at our senior center. We had a citywide effort for our incoming town of Madison residents that are being absorbed into the city of Fitchburg as part of the annexation deal. And I know that Goodman, South Madison has also had some, I think some of those type things in Penn Park. I think I saw some of those similar type of things where we did outreach as a city, which I really think is an awesome idea. I'm hoping to try to figure out how we can do that more often as a city, even in areas that I think you can do that all over the city, kind of like how Madison did, because people sometimes, especially coming out of the pandemic, there's new residents, there's people we haven't seen for a while. So that's really awesome. My biggest challenge right now is getting into communities where we know that need service, but we don't have physical buildings. I have a van and I can drive around and do things, but what kinds of programs can we do as we get into, the winter months where we can't always be outside at a certain time? How can I I'm looking at ways, can I meet the school bus? Can I figure out when there's gathering times? I think some of the elementary schools do conferences in the park, different kinds of things like that, where I'm trying to figure out how I can keep that going all year long. I'm also collaborating with schools, but I'm finding a lot of the schools are really just back into startup mode, trying to bring back programs that might have existed pre-pandemic. A lot of staff turnover and a lot of people who have changed positions, just like we didn't have an outreach librarian for a couple of years here in Fitchburg during the pandemic. So then we're all, which is great because we can reinvent and start over, but then it just takes a little bit longer as we keep going. And I'm not sure if other people have encountered that or not.
Awesome.
This idea of reinvention is something that Mark and I are hearing when we do our annual library visits with all of the libraries, which we've been doing all year long, not just Mark and me, our colleagues here at South Central too, is that so many people in addition to new library staff members, that we've taken a step back and are looking and reflecting at what have we been doing in the past, what worked, and what issues were revealed during the time of the pandemic that require new types of outreach services. And I'm really interested in hearing from anybody who has done that, or if you have questions about how do we get back to providing outreach service, what have we learned? I'm hearing from the youth services librarians that so many programs are being held outside, but as we all mentioned here, what happens in the winter time? So, that's a question that youth services folks have too.
I think to add to
Yep, go
that,
ahead.
to the issue that we hadn't dealt with as much before was, what if you get sick? We always have stood up so many programs based on just what one individual librarian can do. And now, and how many times have we as YS librarians gone when you're kind of sick, and just still done the program? And now we canceled more programs this summer than ever before because people got COVID. And so that's something that we're also struggling with, is how do you manage that? And what does that do to relationships if you have to cancel and you don't have someone else to send? And so that's another thing to add to the struggle list.
And I will add to that also is with the performers that we're contracting as well. Like, we already had committed to this one person to do this series of events, and they are getting sick. And how do we, once we have planned to do this outreach on this specific times, make do with the aftermath of having to cancel and the disappointment of the people?
Yeah, I think you guys bring up great points. I would add to the whole part of the whole communication idea of how to communicate to people who may not have reliable communication methods about cancellations, weather delays, and then when you don't go, what's going to happen? I went every week. We only had one time where I had to cancel something because it was just pouring rain. And that group of children figured it out pretty quickly, that I didn't abandon them, that I just wasn't there because it was raining. But I felt awful. I felt horrible. And I thought, I'm just getting these people really, trusting me. I built this relationship. And now what do I do? So we're already thinking about next summer, like a weather policy. How can I communicate to people if we don't have If they don't have a phone, if they don't have internet, they don't check our website, they don't go to Facebook. And some people just don't use those communication methods. WhatsApp's like the most used method. And, I think I'm like, well, libraries don't use WhatsApp. What can we do? So I'm right there with you. I'm fortunate. I didn't have to cancel anything and for that reason, but that would be hard.
Mindy, you bring up a really interesting topic that maybe we can add to a, I don't know, webinar or CE topic is how are libraries using WhatsApp? I think about my friends who I have in other countries, that's what we use when I communicate with them. And if, as you said, if your community members, this is the app that they're using, maybe that's where we have to figure out how to use it. I wonder if that could even be a question on a needs assessment survey. Mark, we can recommend that or ask Jess about that. And Jess Bauer is the social work field placement officer up at UW Stevens Point.
So I did look into that a little bit. My understanding is there is a desktop app, but your library would need a designated phone. I agree. I use WhatsApp when I'm traveling as well and communicating with people from other countries. But I just thought, I just don't even know how to implement the whole idea. But then that would be your method of communicating. But then you'd have to collect phone numbers and such. But yeah, I would be interested. It would be quite an undertaking, but I think if you figured out a model, it might be a new communication strategy.
Yeah. We talk about with outreach services that we have to meet people where they are. And I'm wondering if any of you have had some, just light bulb moments going off in your brain when you have found a new place to share information, a new partner, or a new agency that has helped you publicize your programs to community members.
There might be some apartment complexes, and I'm thinking Minda, especially for Fitchburg. Like I'm thinking of Nakoma Heights, which is an apartment complex just off of Allied Drive. And they have a community room. It's not super big, but and they have so many kids that live there. And so I think they had reached out to me somehow. Somehow I had ended up doing like weekly or monthly programs out there to meet the kids off the bus and do some book checkout and some story time. So there might be some of those apartment complexes that would give you some space.
Thanks. I had heard of that as well. That's one of our, we have, I think, 9 different elementary schools in Fitchburg. And that was when I was trying to figure out, because that's part of Verona, to try to figure out how to get to them too. I've been like trying to look at everybody's community rooms and like who is willing. And I agree, once you get a partner, then you can share the information through the partner, which is like literally bulletin boards. I've literally put things on bulletin boards where I can get the apartment managers to do that. But that's one too. Then it's at least a physical inside place versus if I'm in the park, they see me and they come running to the van. But if it's winter, it may be a different thing. So I'll have to check that one out and see what Verona's doing.
It's almost well, maybe this is just a an assumption, but like announcements even through radio. But how do you even do that? Because how many folks would potentially be listening at that time for program information?
Thanks for joining us, Rachel. Right, it's knowing, which programs or the specific stations, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. At least well, even schools, would they be willing to share information of that nature? Or I don't know.
So yes, I think, and that's what I'm starting to try to meet with all the community school resource workers. I think that's the right title, that have them, but not all Madison schools have them. Certain Verona schools do, and I don't think Oregon does. But a lot of these people are also new. There was a lot of shifting during the pandemic of people moving from school to school. So they're more than willing, but they're beginning over also. So it is truly a reinvention, which is great because you can figure out what's going to work and what's not going to work. But it's going to take time. I think that's the biggest thing that I'm discovering. It is going to, for the partners and programs that were able to exist through COVID, you have something to keep building on. But there will be a lot of, at least for me in my area, restarting over again, which is great. And that's why it was nice to hear all these different ideas from different people.
For those of you who are doing direct outreach services or supervising outreach service librarians, how do you factor in the time that this type of work takes? And I don't mean simply the time that library staff is away from the desk or away from the building. How do you factor in the planning time and even the reflection time? Outreach work is, takes a lot of energy. How do you help staff take care of their own needs when they're out doing this work, which is very different type of work than, technical services or circulation?
Just chiming in, at Wanakee, we give those, like I have one staff member who does a lot of outreach stuff, and she is obviously out of the building sometimes. Like she does like a tech help thing at the senior center, I think once every couple weeks. So she kind of just has more, she's also a full-time librarian, so she has more off-desk time than, like, let's say just a circulation or a tech services staff member. So she can, like, it's kind of built into her job that she has time to plan, decompress. So yeah, she just has less public facing time, which is hopefully a little less stressful and gives her more time to work on outreach stuff and plan outreach stuff. And I just wanted to add one thing that the Wanakee Library is doing this month that we've done for the past 4 years that is outreachy, is we do, and I'm sure you've seen it, a lot of libraries do it, like an all around town program where you show your library card at different businesses in town during the month of September, and you get whatever discount that they signed up for. And I usually have between 20 and 30 businesses. So that's like what I have this year. And it's going well. And it's kind of just another way to advertise yourself, because I make individual like little posters for every business, and some choose to put them up, some don't. Obviously that's out of your control, but it's just nice to see it on some of the doors on Main Street. And then obviously people who don't really make it to the library that often are seeing that and being like, oh yeah, I do have a library card in my wallet that's just been sitting there. So they can get 10% off or whatever the business is offering. And hopefully that reminds them to kind of come back into the library too. So yeah, that's a pretty, I wouldn't say it's easy enough when it's running. I don't even really think about it during the month of September. It's just a lot of reaching out like during the summer and stuff to get all the businesses in line. But that's kind of a good passive program once it's running.
I think one of the things that our librarians are doing here at Meadow Ridge is they've created like a little newsletter of what's happening at the library and sharing that with our stakeholders and other teachers, social services at the schools, counselors, and other partners. Like, for example, we work a lot with the Meadowood Health Partnership, and we also work together with the crime prevention group here at Meadow Ridge. So them having access to the programs that the librarian is doing at the library is one way of outreach through that newsletter. To your prior question about factoring in time, we do similar, like Wanakee. Our programmers have less desk time than our regular library assistants do. And then on-site programs, some of them are supported by the library staff on site. So we may not necessarily have the librarian conduct the chess club, for example. It is run by another staff person. Those are self-sufficient programs, I will say, that not necessarily needs the librarian to be there at all times. So they have a little bit more time of not necessarily being in all the library programs that we have here at Meadow Ridge. So that frees them more time for planning and being creative on other programs that are more hands-on, or for the outreach elements of communicating those programs, or visiting schools, or accepting schools to come into the library.
Thank you. As I look at the participation here, I see, and I realize that we have a lot of large libraries represented in today's live conversation. And I think all of you, you have the staff too, and you have the policies in place too. A couple of you mentioned that it's just part of the person's job, which I think is really important to state that right up front in position descriptions, so that it isn't something that's simply added on to an expectation of somebody's job, but that it is formally a part of the position description. And then that way other staff understand too.
I have a follow-up question about your newsletter that you are providing. Is it different than like what the library newsletter is? Is it more tailored and customized to special groups? Because I'm starting to do that, but I would love to see an example of what that might look like if you're ever willing to share that.
Sure. I can share how it looks like with you all. I will just email Mark so that it's added to the notes sometime today.
Thank you.
Another thing, Sean, to your point about reflection, and maybe this is something that I don't know if South Central could facilitate, but we pulled all of our programmers together in September to have reflection time. And we had a set of questions, to talk about what went well, what was okay, but you would change some things. What are some things that are hard stops that we don't want to do again? And then what are some lessons that we learned that we really want to make sure that we apply to next summer's planning? And we broke out into small groups to discuss, but still over Zoom, and then had a Jamboard that everyone added their notes to, so that we have kept all of the feedback and then can revisit it to talk about planning for the future. And there were also some things that we could address right away, like multiple people had said, I realized how important it was to have a small, easily foldable table, some things like that. And so then it was also nice to be able to say, everybody go buy that stuff right now. Like the things that you really wanted, we've got some supply money, go and get it so that you can have it for next summer. So it was good to have all of that feedback in one place and for everyone to have each other to share with too.
We could definitely facilitate a conversation like that. And boy, would it be great if I could take a look at the questions that Madison Public Library used, because then, you know, we can share it out between our big libraries, what you all discovered, and do the same thing with all sizes. That's a great idea. Are there any things that you particularly remember, Chrissy, that lessons learned or things that people wouldn't do again?
I think there was a lot about capacity that people just learned, you know, things kind of are moving at a different pace than they used to. And maybe if you were doing 6 programs a day before COVID, you just couldn't do it anymore. So there were definitely comments about that, like to do less, to do some things in a more intentional way, and to plan for sickness.
That's a big one. I think that I'm thinking about the before COVID times, that there were so many times when I came to work, you know, probably when I shouldn't have. And that is just a real cultural shift for me, is that if I have a cold, I don't want to infect my colleague. I don't want Mark to get sick. And that there's this understanding that when you're sick, it doesn't just affect you, you know, it affects the people around you. In some ways, I think we're much more accepting and forgiving of those times when we have to cancel. But it's happening more and more. And it's, as I said, it's just part of a culture that I'm still figuring out and understanding, and I'm sure that our community members are too.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question about the whole idea of doing less, which I think is really interesting in programming. I think we've seen it throughout the library, but I'm wondering too how that has applied to outreach, because not only doing less, but then how many people attend as well. I don't know if with your outreach, if you saw less people attending than usual, or if you saw more people attending, if it was about the same. I think the community is really very intentional with their time and what they do with it now. But I'm not sure. I'm wondering, how does that apply to outreach? I'm trying to figure that out. I don't know if anyone has an answer for that.
I think we have a lot more questions, you know, and are talking more about who we're serving and why we're going to the event. You know, because I do think before we were really running under the like, we'll say yes to absolutely as everything, you know, as much as we possibly can, you know, that there's the no's are pretty limited. And we did have like a lot of those Parks Alive events, you know, had 100 to 150 people at them. But we were having a lot more conversation earlier about the events where, you know, maybe it was also Parks Alive, but in a different park and there were only 10 people coming. You know, so we were talking more about like, okay, well, what is our goal with these and who are we meeting? And are we hoping to be seeing people who are not library users at these events? And how do we know they're not regular users? And is the goal to turn them into regular users? Or is the goal to present like a satellite service? You know, and I don't, have definitely not figured it out, but I think we're having the conversation now where before we didn't, you know, and just discussing like every event we're going to, we should have an elevator speech and know why we're going and what we're promoting and be really clear, because we do so much, it's impossible to really sell everything, you know, so we really need to better target our messaging and our reasoning behind why we're going to each specific thing. So sorry, just a lot of questions, but we're happy to have thought partners on all of it.
I will add to what Chrissy says. It's just like having that equity lens, always in your mind when decision making. It does really help support that process of thought and those similar questions of aligning with the priority and the customer service framework of your library make a huge difference in what our capacity is and the importance of being involved in some things.
Thank you. It's refreshing to hear that big libraries, bigger than me, have those same questions. I had those same thoughts all summer as I was going about it. So it's really refreshing to hear that.
As a facilitator, I'm really excited about these questions. And I think that these are things that we can build future conversations on, going back to the questions and, are we closer to having some solutions or answers or thoughts about those questions, that if one person or one library is having that question, others are too. And, we're seeing this with Fitchburg and Madison right here. And I think that's something that we can do moving forward is have those facilitated conversations and a report out. So in our final 5 minutes, just want to give everybody a heads up. We have 5 minutes left. Are there other topics that you'd like to talk about in terms of outreach programs? Or are there future topics that you would like us to address in additional meetings? Our next meeting will be held in
Should be
No,
December.
December. Thank you. So we meet every 2 months, and we will have a meeting. They come up faster than we think, and we don't have to have the topic determined today, but we're always the topic for today's conversation came from Minda. So thank you, Minda, for asking about outreach programs and what other people are doing. I think it's something we can always revisit, and there are ways that we can share today's information as well as, ask people to share more information throughout the coming days and weeks, months and years, because it's something that we're going to be doing, forever. And we're always looking for new outreach program ideas.
I have another question. I don't know if it necessarily is a topic. One thing is I've noticed is that we as librarians all like to share and learn from each other. But one thing that I've just started figuring out is evident by some of our conversations here already. There's a lot of libraries within South Central that like touch borders. And it's interesting to try to figure out, okay, because I have a lot of people in the town of Madison attachment that will go to Goodman Library. And I'm like, great, you're getting to a library. The bus doesn't come to our library. I'm just glad you're going there. But there's a lot of possibility for collaboration there, especially with like the South Madison whole big plan about how, when we have libraries that reach boundaries with each other, how are we gonna try to collaborate together to help the people with services? This also goes for us in Fitchburg towards Verona. I think that happens with a lot of communities, maybe more the larger libraries in the big metropolitan areas. I am not sure, but just something to kind of think about, because we want to work together. And if someone already has a program, that's great. I'm like, great, I'm glad you're doing that. And that's one area that I now know that those people are being taken care of. That's awesome. But just maybe a really big collaboration question at some point.
Great idea, especially looking at the group that's here today. And my advocacy brain makes me think, and boy, would legislators love to hear about that. So if we can,
Yeah.
3 years from now, have some examples to share with legislators about how libraries are working together. That'd be great. All right. Are there any final questions or comments or wishes that anybody would like to share before we end our meeting for this month? Well, if not, thank you for spending the last hour with all of us. It's so good to see colleagues um, via Zoom and also in person. So I hope to see a lot of you in person soon. And let us know if you have any questions or any thoughts that come up after today's meeting. We can add them to the next meeting's conversation or connect you with one another. We're here to help you all. All right. Thank you so much. And we'll see you next time.
Great seeing everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.